talk in Arabic, Mr. Wade can understand.
No, it has.
Okay, Ahmed, but I want to ask you to be a little bit shorter than the previous intervention, so we can have better participation.
No, I'm going to speak in English anyhow. My name is Amr Noor. I'm working at Ministry of Planning. Thanks for the very interesting lecture, and I'm very happy to raise some questions. First of all, to start with Adam Smith, this is a very successful story to speak about development. And you have also raised the three factors which were the development strategy of Adam Smith based, that is peace, easy taxation. Of course, this is not applicable on Palestine because we have no peace yet. Still, we are under occupation and our resources are under occupation. But my question is to raise a question about your lecture itself. First, you speak that USA has industrial policy, high industrial policy. I believe in that. Secondly, this and the industrial policy which you have defined, you defined as selective assistance strategies. State gives selective assistance to some sectors. In the other part, you raise the questions that the assistance must be made conditional on performance. This is very much affiliated with the tools which the international capitalism is created in the world, that is World Trade Organizations and other instruments, and World Bank also, to facilitate for the big capitalist countries who have already developed their industries, who have followed all protections, all type of protections to raise up their industries. I have very good experience about the Korean economy, the Indian economy, and the Chinese economy, how the protection is used on a very wide scale. In the third part of your lecture, you said that state intervention can also destroy market.
Thank you.
No, but just one thing. Another thing I feel that is one thing is missing, that is the monetary policies. You have not, since you are talking about development, you will have concentrated more on the physical, and the monetary issues are absent. How when the Americans diverted from the international gold standards and how it has affected other economies.
Thank you. أعطي للوراء والله للترتيب.
Thank you, Robert. Great to have you here. My name is Ala Tartir, and I'm the program director of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, and a PhD candidate at LSE as well. You talked about the World Bank and the resistance to the industrial policies. And the World Bank is a leading arm or the key actor in the aid industry in the occupied Palestinian territory. And the Palestinian economy is heavily dependent on international aid. And for many scholars, when we talk about development, we talk by default also about the aid industry. And the Palestinian economy received more than $23 billion over the last 2 decades. My question, how these aid funds and aid industry play in this game? Where does it fit? And also, can you give us a few rule of thumb?
Sorry, just let me clarify, where does the aid industry fit in which game?
And the whole, exactly, the IP, basically, the industrial policies, where, because it is so heavily, because the economy is so heavily dependent on that. So in terms of theoretical understanding, where does it fit? And can you share with us a few rule of thumbs or on how we can affect the priorities of the donor community in order to pay their attention that there is something concrete that can be happen instead of wasting their money?
Thank you. Can you pass it to
First of all, I would like to thank you, really thank you for the really valuable lecture.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Najah Shayin. I'm a researcher at Bisan Center. I would say first of all that actually, I don't know if you know that the only, at least to the best of my knowledge, the only place in the world where the Constitution goes in its Article 21 here in Ramallah, that we adopt a free market economy. So this is constitutional. and we are against the constitution to ask the state to come back if I am to bring back events and such on. So here we are, free market stuff. But I like to think if there is really a possibility when you are free in Palestine with good governance and with democracy, that's the prescription of the World Bank, to do a lot here. I don't know if there is any serious, from your point of view, possibility of development in the PA's territories with the prescriptions of the World Bank.
Thank you.
Secondly, I would like to ask you about Malaysia. I'm sort of stuck in the issue of Malaysia, and I recall that you wrote about a sort of exceptional performance by Mahathir Mohamad and Malaysia in the 1990s crisis, but now Malaysia is stuck. Though Mahathir Mohamad did not lack all the stuff of the leadership that you mentioned, I guess he was so aggressive when it comes to the relationship between the government and capital. He knew very well how to subsidize and to support the successful sectors of the industry. He has definitely an industrial policy, but at the end of the day, he didn't make that great success.
Thank you.
Is that all? Sorry. Another point, only one point. I would like to ask, do you think seriously, I mean from a theoretical point of view, that everyone is liable, everyone is possibly able to catch up? Can we dream of a capitalist world in which everybody, every country, every state is successful? Or is it rather to bring Emmanuel Bernstein, Amin and the stuff, it is a world system where you produce poverty all the time in the peripheries and that we are not free? Here in Ramallah we compete, the government, the Palestinian Authority, and the NGOs to get the Western funding. That's our game. And we are actually structured and shaped by their agenda. Nobody here is free. And I guess there are many people in the world, many states, many countries who are not free to choose their track, and the elites are not free. You can easily buy elites everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Professor Wade, first I'd like to commend Mass for being the one place for being the one place in this town where in the space of 2 weeks we can have the thesis and the antithesis in the same hall, namely the lecture 2 weeks ago by the World Bank and today yours. So that's a plus for Mass, even though outside Mass perhaps, thinking is perhaps more one direction, unidirectional. And as far as the many topics you covered, I know you wanted, one of the options was to talk about the rise of China and you touched on that, but luckily I think because it's a very complex issue here and very problematic, the same issue of trade protection for Chinese imports, and you've seen Hebron, etc. I won't go into that. But the issue that I think that you're also one of the issues you're an expert on, and which is concerned with those of us in the multilateral economic governance system in the last years, is precisely the extent to which the institutions that are so prevalent, the bank and the fund, within the institutions and in their practices and in their preaching, have they really learned the lessons of the crisis? In your view, you referred to a few things. I mean, we've all seen noises and smelt sort of certain signals coming out from these institutions here and there. But do you think that there's been a really serious reconsideration of the whole package, not only the IP package? And have you seen it on the ground in any of the developing countries? Can we hope, basically, I think the question was posed to the World Bank last time, how long are you going to keep telling us this stuff and when are you going to leave? And the answer is basically we're not leaving. So do you think that, there's any shift?
Thank you. طيب في الستات ما حدش حكى شو القصة؟ ما في اهتمام بالاندستريال بوليسي للستات؟ إذا ما فيش أعطينا للسيد
Thank you very much, Dr. Reid, for a very interesting lecture. My name is Orhan Nikšić. I'm with the World Bank. And first thing I want to tell you that actually I agree with you that markets are definitely not sufficient, and markets very often don't work. And I can also tell you that there are a lot of colleagues whom I work with in the World Bank who share that view. And I think the World Bank has been going through a transformation. I don't know if it's now where you want to see it, but I see a lot of transformation. My question to you is, in a country with weak governance, in a country where institutions which are set up to, in the name, support the private sector and support industrial policy, but in fact are set up oftentimes to promote the interests of particular groups, how do you set up institutions that promote industrial policy for the broader benefit of the society? Do you first have to work on a broader governance or agenda, or is it possible to somehow set up these islands in isolation from the overall governance environment of a country? How do you prioritize interventions? And also, I have a second question, which is related to Palestine. In an environment where the government does not control 60% of the territory in the West Bank, where any economic activity in 60% of the West Bank is not possible because of restrictions, where trade is severely restricted. It's almost impossible to import anything from Gaza to the West Bank, where it's almost impossible to import much of the machinery because they're considered dual-use goods. How effective would industrial policy be if you don't address those other things which may be currently the binding constraint on the economic development?
Thank you. Last, okay, Mr.
This is Fatih Bعنوان, commercial literature of Turkey. I'd like to ask you something, Mr. Wade. Could you please give us some information about UK experience in the industrial policy? It's very striking for me, you exclude UK policy in your presentation. If it's not a secret, could you tell us why? And if you know anything about UK industrial policy, I would be very happy to hear about that. Thank you very much.
For a change, I have a very short question. To what extent do you think that the agricultural subsidies policies of the US and Europe are part of what you describe as industrial policies? And I feel that you have left out those policies, although they are very important for the agricultural sector. And to what extent do you consider these as benevolent industrial policies from your viewpoint? Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I go?
I wanted to begin with the questions from, sorry, what is your name again? Orhan, from the World Bank. You suggested the World Bank has been or is being transformed, and I want to put to you a question, but I'll begin further back. I worked in the bank in the 1980s, and I saw the transformation. When I went there in 1984, there were many technologists, engineers employed at the World Bank who would go out and give advice about the chemical sector or about the electrical sector or whatever it was that their expertise was in. At just that time, they began to be either fired from the World Bank or they were invited to retrain to become experts in primary education or in public health or in good governance or in environmental assessments. And the bank moved just radically away from the idea that it had any role in helping to build industry in developing countries. So you are right in the sense that about 3 weeks ago, one vice presidency at the bank, the Finance and Private Sector Development Vice Presidency, had a conference which had the words industrial policy in the title, and several people spoke about industrial policy. But this is the first time in decades that this has ever happened. And so you can't, you know, there's this expression in English, one swallow does not make a spring. Spring is not signaled by the arrival of one swallow. And so the arrival of one conference by one vice presidency on industrial policy does not mean any significant shift in broad thinking. When I did my research in the World Bank in 2010, I encountered very strong hostility to the very idea. However, the vice president of that same vice presidency, Finance and Private Sector Development, was interested in having some pilot projects on industrial policy. I think one was in Jordan, one was in India, in Vietnam, in Kazakhstan. So he put together a small group of people to organize these pilot projects to give selective assistance to certain industries in those countries. But they did it in top secret, or rather they never used the phrase industrial policy. It was called the Competitive Partnerships Initiative. And I asked the person why they called it that, and he said because nobody could object to any of those three words. Everybody likes competition, everybody likes partnerships, everybody likes initiatives. So that was 2010. And one of the, so the question to you is, has the bank been employing, as part of this transformation and thinking that you talk about, has it been employing engineers? Has it been employing technologists? My guess is no, that is my guess. One problem with the way that the bank thinks about industrial policy is that because it equates industrial policy with sort of big-scale picking winners, like Korea picked the steel industry, when the World Bank in 1970 said to Korea, don't go into steel, steel is not your comparative advantage. Korea went ahead and made a success of it. The World Bank still thinks that industrial policy means that kind of really big state-led initiative. And one of the points I've been trying to emphasize here is that there's a whole range of instruments and scales of industrial policy, and at one end, at the other end from Korea picking steel, there is the kind of thing that the Taiwan Industrial Development Bureau was doing year after year after year. Somebody asked about the prospects for Palestine developing, and let me just, Palestinian industry developing, let me just repeat the point I've been trying to make, which is that it is surely possible for a relatively small group of engineers, they may not be clearly public officials, they may be sort of parastatal on the edge of the state, employed under somewhat different employment arrangements, but it's possible to get a pool of these people to go out and visit factories across many sectors in Palestine to give advice about how to improve the production layout, how to improve the kind of machine tools that are being used, and so on and so on. That is small scale. That doesn't depend on the approval of the Israeli government. That can be done, very soon. What needs to happen is that some people at the top of the Palestinian Authority become committed to doing this, rather than to simply see Palestine as continuing as a place where people are kept alive and where there's a development of some services and some kind of wines, but not any kind of development of industry. My sense is that there seems to be a kind of resignation to the elimination of Palestinian industry because of Chinese competition, or because we must practice free trade. We must get imports we must get products from wherever the cheapest sources of supply is, ignoring the question of what happens to employment and income generation within Palestine. So I don't think that there is justification for this sense of defeatism that I have encountered in the last few days. Somebody asked about the role of finance, the short answer is that I don't know. I don't have a clear answer to the question, what is the role of finance? But what I will say is this, that in economics textbooks, finance tends to be presented as simply the lubricant or the oil of the economy. And just as oil does not make the engine go, that oil is necessary for the engine, so people say finance is just kind of passive. You must have finance, but it doesn't have any influence over the real economy. That is fundamentally wrong. And we should have learned well before 2008 that idea of money as a veil over the real economy is fundamentally wrong. That if we learn anything from 2008, it must be that finance can become a very active destroyer of economies. It can boost economic growth quite artificially because it's on the basis of people buying things on debt, on credit. But then it can destroy, and that's what has been happening. So the role of finance has to, as the person who asked the question is quite right, the role of finance has to be brought much more centrally into development. But it has to be regarded as potentially very dangerous. Just to give you a case, this is from Britain. Mark Carney, who is the rock star, like the Bono of central banking, as Bono is to rock music, brought in on a very high salary from the Bank of Canada. He really